from get speaking gigs now. And I think that authors, coaches, all of us are trying to get speaking gigs. Some of us are kind of nervous. Not like I personally don't feel ready for it all the time because I'm shy and it terrifies me every time I go to speak. I know that you're pro and you've done this 500 times
like
more
600,
now.
but
600. Does it get easier?
Nervousness is for different people at different times. Yeah.
Okay, so where did you get started?
For me, I would say this is something common that I hear among people who have a desire to speak. It feels like a calling. And when we look back on history, it feels like, oh, this has kind of been around forever. For me, for my whole life, for me, it really comes in the form of wanting to teach more than, oh, I want to be a speaker. I don't remember as a kid ever wanting to be a speaker. But I do remember thinking, oh, I want to be a teacher one day. I want to be a gymnastics teacher, a kindergarten teacher, as I was go through my life. And I did become a teacher. I taught interpersonal communication at Cal State Fullerton when I was 20 or 22. And I got my bachelor's and master's in speech communication. So it wasn't shocking that I became a speaker. However, I didn't become a professional speaker until I was 40 years old. So I had a big gap in there of like, I remember I never thought in college, oh, I'm going to be a speaker. It just didn't, I don't know, maybe it wasn't really an option or didn't occur to me that I could do that at that time.
Okay. I'm curious
Oh.
what went on in the gap.
Oh, that's a whole nother podcast. But
Okay.
well, I'll sum it up really. I got married. I had a daughter. I opened a day spa. I was in sales. I was in executive leadership and real estate investing. I mean, I've done a lot of different things but a lot of it was in sales. And all of those skills help me help my clients now. Because a lot of times with speaking, what we don't realize is as entrepreneurs is that it's still selling, right? Like usually you don't become an entrepreneur because you're like, I want to sell stuff, right? I want to sell myself. No, it's because we have a desire to do something, a message to share, like an author, it's like, oh, I've got to get this out. But then if you're going to, keep being an entrepreneur, keep having your business, sales need to occur.
Yeah.
So I'm really, gifted in helping heart-centered people sell with integrity, with, alignment, where you're feeling really good about what you're saying and what you're offering from stage, like as a speaker.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people had the same thing as you, the gap, because we try all these different things. I know like working in agencies, there's a lot of just word of mouth and you never ever think to build up your portfolio until one day you're just like, damn, should have been doing this years ago. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So when it comes to getting speaking gigs now, how do you do that?
Yeah. So one of the ways that I help people is through the Speakers Training Academy. And like I said, I had started speaking at the age of 40. I was hired by a personal development company. They said, here's this great talk. This is how we get clients. Go out and give the talk and sign people up. So I did. And in that first year, I booked and delivered over 80 speaking engagements. And what happened is people would ask me over and over again, like, how did you do that? How are you doing this? What are you saying to people? And that's when I had to take a step back, or I was enlightened to take a step back and go, how do I do that? What am I doing? So all those tricks and tools and strategies and actions and everything, the attitude that I have is all in my Speakers Training Academy curriculum, because it's like, it's not just one thing. It's quite a few things, but it's doable. I did it without really realizing what I was doing, but then I cataloged all of it. And that teaching piece came back in where it's like, okay, you need to do this, 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 and this. And it starts with getting your talk ready to rock. I actually consider myself a talk doula. Like, it's like, let's give birth to this new talk. I just did one yesterday with a client. It was so beautiful. And then the speaker, entrepreneur, author has a talk in their pocket. It's like, oh, now I can hold my head up high and say, I have something to offer. This all makes sense. This ties right into my business. And then we go, okay, now that you've got your talk done, where are we going to be speaking? Who would best benefit from your message? How are you going to use that to build the business? And so then everything else comes after that.
Okay, I apologize if you can hear my partner singing in the background.
Oh, hey.
He would be a great speaker, just unhinged. So when is it time to go from, okay, we prepped this, I'm
Mhm.
ready to go, I'm confident with this, to, oh my God, it's time to speak? Because sometimes
Yeah.
we can practice and practice and it's still nerve wracking, or do we just need to jump in sometimes
You
and
know,
get sloppy
yeah.
in the beginning?
Yeah, I'd say failing forward is a great methodology. Not that you're going to fail, but one of the things I think people that creates the nervousness is because if you've never done any, if you've never done something for the first time, you kind of have a right to be like, oh, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm not really good at it, but you're not going to get good at it by not doing it. So I always say you just got to get out there. There's a lot of tips that I'll help people with. Like, for example, I don't recommend your very first speaking engagement to be the one, the best, like to your ideal target market. It's like, no, pick a lower risk one where it's like, oh, if I totally screw this whole thing up, no one's, no harm, no foul. Give yourself time to practice. That's also another thing. I think of it as like tying your shoe. Like when you're a little kid and you're learning how to tie your shoe, you don't do it the first time. Usually it's a little messy, it's
Yeah.
loose, the knots come out, you either make a knot or it comes all apart. But
Yeah.
muscle memory, it gets easier.
Yeah. Lisa, did I tell you about this speech contest I won in grade 7?
Oh my gosh,
Oh my
no,
God.
how exciting.
I wrote this whole speech on volunteer services overseas.
Oh,
My
wow.
brother was my hero who inspired this. And I was supposed to speak in front of the whole school, get in
Yeah.
the gym, it's time for an assembly.
Yeah,
And
I
and
get
I
that.
chickened out. I chickened
Oh,
out and I didn't do it. And sometimes I honestly wonder, like, what would my life be if I just,
oh.
you know, put myself out there? And
Yeah, I
it's so
understand. Well, you're
scary,
doing it
but
now. You're putting yourself out there now.
well, I think maybe this is a tip for timid people like me. Just start a
Sure.
podcast and have
Yeah.
conversations, and then it doesn't feel like you're speaking, really. It feels like you're having a dialogue, and if you're an active listener, bring on amazing guests like Lisa. She'll do the speaking for you. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a little different, I think, than like hosting a webinar, doing your keynote
Mhm.
signature presentation. I do think it's really important to have a signature presentation. Is there like a cap? Do you think we should have one, start with one, or just write a list of everything we're great at speaking about?
Oh my gosh, I get that question a lot. I always say start with one, do it 20 times. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, because it's going to evolve, it's going to change, it's going to grow. It's going to seep into your DNA, your unconscious competence is going to kick in, and then write another one. The reason I mean, I have a few that I do, but I usually stick to one at a time because if you think about it, if you have 3 talks, that means 3 possible PowerPoint presentations, 3 offers, 3 things you need to make sure and do and keep track of. When you're new, you don't need more pressure and more things to worry about. Just like stay
Yeah.
focused. Also, there's a trap that I find entrepreneurs can get into, and it's the content creation trap or seduction of like, oh, well, I'll start speaking when I write another talk, or I'll start speaking when I create my workshop or write more blogs, or there. So we can sometimes use content creation as a way to avoid sales and putting ourselves out there and getting out of that comfort zone. So as long as you're putting yourself out there, you found something that worked, then go ahead and write your next talk. There's not really a hard set rule, but I would say it really depends on what your goal is. What are you trying to achieve? Is there a financial goal that you have? Is there amount of people? Are you trying to fill a workshop, a retreat? And it's really what's behind that is helping people, transform people's lives, right? Like really make a difference, make an impact. And so if you're not out there speaking or, scaling your message in some way, you're not making the impact that you really want to make.
What about for people who are scared to start
Mhm.
because they don't want one person to show up? Like, God forbid, only one person shows up. Like, maybe that's why we're obsessed with
Oh,
going viral and getting traffic, and we put off sales because we want that clout. So
yeah.
if one person shows up, you do it, you give it
Oh,
your
yeah.
best.
You deliver, you swing for the fences. It doesn't matter. You never know, in my opinion, you never know who you are there to inspire, to change. Like someone need to hear your message. So I've had that situation. I mean, 600 talks, they weren't all home runs, right? So I've had that situation where I showed up and like 2 people were there, and I go for it. You just never know. You never know who needed to hear what you had to say.
Oh,
You're there anyway. What are you going to say? Oh, you're not important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a relief to hear. And
Yeah.
actually, sometimes as the consumer or the audience member, I like when it's intimate. So it's not
Me
always bad
too.
to be the only person in the room.
I've had some of my best sales in rooms and audiences of 10 or less. So, I mean, we're talking over $10,000 in sales. So please don't, if you're listening, do not worry so much about that. I think sometimes that can be a seduction as well, of like, oh, we're going to put you in front of thousands of people. I was like, well, you can make a lot of money in small groups too.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know you have lots of tips in your program, Get Speaking Gigs Now. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what we learn as we go through this.
Yes. So if you go, I'll give everyone a free gift right now. If you go to Get Speaking Gigs Now, you'll get the 5 top tips to get more speaking gigs. That's just right to your inbox, and some bonus tips in there for you as well. I'll reiterate, the one thing that I usually start people with is the get your talk ready to rock, because I have found, just like what you're talking about, Jess, it's like, oh my gosh, what should I talk about? Is anyone going to want to hear it? I don't know. Is this going to work? What should I say? How does this, and there's all these questions that come up, and you end up like kind of hiding as a speaker, like, well, I'm not ready to put that in my title yet on LinkedIn. And so when you have that talk ready to rock and you're like, oh, this is awesome. Because every time I work with someone, and I call myself a talk doula, and the talk comes out, it's like, you look in the eyes of your talk, you fall instantly in love, just like it was a baby. You're like, oh my gosh, I love my baby. You can't wait to share it. And that's really exciting. So we start there. And then, of course, you got to figure out, it's all about strategy. Like, where are you going to put your message out there? Who are you going to reach out to? What are you going to say when you reach out to them? Positioning yourself to be ready.
And do you help people with that as well?
I'm coaching them throughout the whole process, because everyone's speaking journey is a little bit different. Some people come to me and they have nothing, like they have no offer, they have no program yet, and we need to build from there. Some people come to me and they already have an extensive program, but they just haven't hit the mark on speaking. There's some cloudiness, there's some, so wherever you are in the journey, we help you in that regard.
Okay. Leisa, one final tip for everyone? Can only pick one thing.
I can only pick one. Well, I typically say done is better than perfect. So if you're listening and you're like, well, it's not perfect yet, and I don't know, I'm still working on it, those are signs that you are using perfection as an excuse to move forward. And once you get out of your own way, then you can actually start, and that sounds cliche, but then you can start really affecting people and making an impact. And if you think about the message and not you and your fears and insecurities, then all of a sudden you're re-inspired.
Awesome. Leisa, thank you so much. Get Speaking Gigs Now. I've actually downloaded your freebies and your business bundle stuff as well, and love listening to you, and you've been a big inspiration. So thank you for coming on today, and I'll see you in our networking mixer coming up in like a couple minutes.
Header today.
All right. Thank you so much, Leisa. Thanks, everybody.